Hey everyone, it's Dr. Erin here, one of the good doctors of Abbey Research, and I am back for our third video in our celebration of Native American Heritage Month during the month of November here in the United States. And today I'm going to be talking about a couple of podcast recommendations. So the inspiration for kind of the different types of media that I'm covering in these videos is that we firmly believe at Abbey Research, and Dr. Kristen and I believe as human beings, that through other people's stories, through hearing other people's stories from their own voices, their own experiences, their own lives and hardships and trials and all of the things that happen with people from all different kinds of cultural backgrounds, you learn about them as individuals, and it's a process of humanizing them. And that's particularly important for marginalized groups like Native Americans, Indians, Indigenous peoples, whose histories have not often or hardly ever been told from their own perspective in a real public sense. But the great news about kind of the access of the internet is we can now access these stories that people are writing and telling. So last week I did books. This week I'm doing podcasts. I don't know if anybody out there watching this likes podcasts. I just recently got into them. Dr. Kristen has been listening to them for a long time. With my introversion, there's only like 2 ways that I can listen to them: in the car or at the gym. Otherwise, I get distracted. But they have become great ways for me to travel across the state, which I do very often. And I absolutely love all the things that I learned from the different podcasts that I follow. And earlier this year, I came across my first podcast as a recommendation, I think off of Twitter. And the podcast is called This Land. And it is done by Rebecca Nagel, who is an Oklahoma journalist and citizen of Cherokee Nation. And I mean, at its basic level, it covers a 1999 murder case that is now gone all the way to the Supreme Court. So it's a 2019 Supreme Court case that has massive implications for sovereignty of 5 different tribes in Oklahoma, Cherokee tribe being one of them. But the intricacies of the murder case are really interesting, just because the person who was murdered, when the cops originally investigated it, they had the crime scene wrong, and it turns out the crime scene was actually on Muskogee Creek land, which is one of the 5 tribes involved in the case, and therefore should have been adjudicated by Muskogee Creek tribe through their system of justice rather than through the U.S. federal system of justice. So that is the basic argument of the case, but it has a lot to do with Indian land and rights and sovereignty and assimilation and erasure that happened to the peoples that many of whom were forced to migrate to Oklahoma, which was originally called Indian Country before it became a state. And so it's a really layered blog, but it's a wonderful exploration of kind of the impact of U.S. federal law and the relationships between the U.S. government and Indians and tribal laws and kind of these differences. But there's also a wonderful exploration of identity and culture and respect. And so I can't talk about it more, really. So I follow Rebecca on Twitter. She's also been doing daily tweets for Native American Heritage Month with history, a brief tweet thread history of what's been going on, of various issues facing Native Americans and Indians in the United States. That's all last week. She did implications of U.S. federal law and how it has been used to control and assimilate and erase Native and Indigenous peoples. So they're super depressing history lessons, but super, super important, especially as part of what we're doing in Native American Heritage Month is trying to gain some visibility for these histories and peoples and cultures that have been ignored and erased and misrepresented for too long. Speaking of misrepresented, my second podcast is called All My Relations, and it involves two women, Matika Wilbur, who is a visual storyteller from the Swinomish and Tulalip peoples of coastal Washington. And I have talked about her before in another video, link below, but she's been documenting Native America with her project 562, which is amazing, link below. And her co-podcaster, co-host on the podcast is Dr. Adrienne Green, who is the creator and author of the blog Native Appropriations and is also a faculty member of American Studies and Ethnic Studies at Brown University and a citizen of Cherokee Nation. Y'all, I can't tell you how much I love this podcast. I just finished episode 3 at the gym this weekend, which was on Native mascots. These women do an absolutely phenomenal job of just telling stories, and I could listen to them talk all day. Matika has one of the best laughs you're ever going to hear in your life. But the podcast exists in this wonderful idea of discussing all our relationships as Native peoples, relationships to land, to ancestors, and to each other. And that's a quote from the podcast website. So the first episode is all about why they started the podcast, where these two women come from, what it means to be a Native American woman, what it means for them to be Indigenous feminists, which was an amazing conversation, and what motivated them to host this podcast and tell these stories. Their second episode was on food sovereignty, which was really, really interesting. And the Native mascots one, they also cover DNA testing, appropriation, all of these kind of culturally really significant issues that we aren't talking about. Even when we do talk about issues that are facing Indians today, some of these other cultural ones don't get talked about as much. It's a wonderful podcast. It's a great way to learn and to listen and to sit with other people's stories, which is a really important thing to do. And I can't recommend it enough. So those are my two podcasts, This Land by Rebecca Nagel and All My Relations by Matika Wilbur and Adrienne Green. You can find them wherever you find podcasts. It feels weird to say that, but that's what everybody says these days. I've included links below to the podcast, to Adrienne's blog, and to some other links for other podcasts, Native podcasts as well, if that is a particular rabbit hole you feel you want to fall down and you love listening to podcasts. It's a great democratization of information, in that you need, a pretty decent microphone and a way to record your stories and a way to get them out there. And it's exciting to see it happening in so many places. So that's all I have for this video for Native American Heritage Month. I'll be back next week with my last video, where I will be talking about some really interesting TED Talks that I have found by Native American and Indigenous voices on the old internets. But for now, I'm Dr. Erin, one of the good doctors of Abbey Research. Have a great week, everybody.